We've had a wonderful time in Sydney, all the way from fish and chips to Tchaikovsky. And I had a chance to speak to the Society for Asian and Pacific Studies the other day. And so I wanted to sort of pick up on what we were talking about there and then try to build on it. That the argument is that there is a sea change going on in the world. That over the last generation, we've seen Asia rise, and China in particular, now the second largest economy in the world. And they say very quickly will be competing with the American economy in terms of size. That China has risen behind the economic rise politically. It's become a force to be reckoned with. And where we begin is that China is not a country, it's a continent. It's almost 1/4 of the world's population. And for a century and a half after having been the arbiter, competing with Europe as the arbiter of science and civilization on the planet, with the Industrial Revolution, China fell out of the picture. And 150 years, for economic reasons, political reasons, this world has been silenced. And a liberal world, a world of individuals, has risen. And so what we've seen is we've seen China come up on the horizon, economically and then politically, and the argument today is culturally. That that there's a changing cultural order in the world today too, and that China's going to make a difference. There we go. And what I use to try to capture what I think, like when we ask the question, so Chinese culture is going to make a difference, what does Chinese culture have on offer? How is it going to make a difference? And I use this distinction that James Carse makes between a finite and an infinite game. A finite game is very familiar. You have a finite set of rules, you have a finite time, you play the game to win or lose, you have a winner, you have a loser. And that model is really fundamental, particularly in a world full of individuals. The second model is infinite games. Infinite games is me and my son, strengthening our relationship so that we can deal with increasingly complex problems as they evolve. And they are evolving, that problems don't get easier, they get more complex. And so we strengthen our relationship. It's not to play to win, it's to play so that we can win together. And so we move from a win-lose kind of a model to a win-win model. And the perfect storm that the human race is facing today, with global warming, with massive species extinction, with food and water shortages, with pandemics, with natural disasters, that these kind of perfect storm that we're facing really requires that we move from the idea that somebody's going to be a winner and somebody's going to be a loser to the realization that either we're all winners or we're all losers. That's the starting point. And so what I want to introduce to you, or to find a language to talk about, is the difference between a concept of human beings that has very deep roots in the Western philosophical narrative, and a concept of human becomings that is fundamental in this other narrative that we call China, and by extension, East Asia, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, the Semitic world. Now, I'm not going to read anything today. That's really tedious. But I'm going to just read a paragraph or two at the beginning, just to frame the issue. But what is a human being? This was the perennial Greek question asked in Plato's Phaedo and Aristotle's De Anima. And perhaps the most persistent answer from the time of Pythagoras was an ontological one. The being of a human being is a permanent, ready-made, and self-sufficient soul. And know thyself, the signature exhortation of Socrates, is to know this soul. Each of us is a person, and from conception has the integrity of being a person. So the concept of a human being. Now, I want to set that in contrast to this notion of a human becoming. In what way do persons in their roles and relations become consummately human? This then was the perennial Confucian question asked explicitly in all of the 4 books, the canonical texts of the Chinese tradition, in the Great Learning, in the Analects of Confucius, in the Mencius, and again in the Zhongyong. And the answer from the time of Confucius was a moral, aesthetic, and ultimately religious one. One becomes human by cultivating those thick, intrinsic relations that constitute one's initial conditions and that locate the trajectory of one's life force within family, community, and cosmos. Cultivate your person, shou shen, the signature exhortation of the Confucian canons, is the ground of the Confucian project of becoming consummate as a person. It is to cultivate one's conduct assiduously as it is expressed through those family, community, and cosmic roles and relations that one lives. In this Confucian tradition, we need each other. If there is only one person, there are no persons. Consummate in our conduct, ren, then is something, and that we either do together or not at all. So this idea of human becomings begins from the definition of a human being as a manifold of roles and relationships. If I walk in this room and I speak English, I would say, everyone, everybody, please stand up. Body, one. This idea of discreteness of the human being. If I were to speak Chinese, I would say, 大家请站起来. Big family, please stand up. Because in the Chinese world, like a family, 人家, like a family, 国家, that we are constituted by our roles and relationships. Now, what I want to worry about is an idea that has had an enormous, important role in the evolution of our contemporary Western society, and that is the notion of the individual. In the French Revolution, the American Revolution, these ideas, the idea of emancipation, the idea of equality, the idea of ethnic disparity, the idea of aristocrats and serfs, that we were liberated by this idea. And at the same time, the argument is, not only is this idea a fiction, but it has become a pernicious fiction. That it's become pernicious in the sense that it has become a moral argument on the behalf of a libertarian society. That I know that the Australian economy is in better shape than the American economy, but this Occupy Wall Street thing that is happening in the United States, for me, is the beginning of an American spring. We've seen an Arab Spring, that the growing economic disparity between the haves, the have-mores, and the have-nots, the very middle class in America is being undermined, is being threatened. And so this idea of justifying this increasing disparity between the 1% and the 99% has become a very serious problem. And I don't know what's going to happen. I know that we can't sustain it. Just to give you an idea, my father, a farmer, apple farmer, one person working, 6 children, $500 for me to go to college. I worked in the summer, $300. I got a scholarship, $500. I went to college and I became a professor, and I've had a good life. I sent my older son to Boston University 10 years ago, and it cost $25,000 a year. If I were to send my second son to the same education today, it would cost $45,000 a year. Who took all the money? That college debt in America has now outstripped credit card debt. These kids are graduating from college without the guarantee of a job and with an enormous debt. So the four pillars, the job, the health insurance that comes with the job, medical care, the health care, the house that comes along with the job, and so on. That the basics of the ordinary people are disappearing, are moving out of reach. And what will be the consequences of that, I'm not sure. But what I want to argue today is that we have a predicament, and predicaments require a change in values, intentions, and practices. And that but it's not because we want to do this. It's because we're going to need to do this. We're going to need to make this kind of a change. We're going to have to rethink some of our most fundamental ideas. So what I want to do is I want to begin with a little story from the Analects of Confucius. And that is a passage that in China has produced not only massive amounts, over the last 15 years, massive amounts of literature, but websites full of literature. This one passage. And the backstory is that Confucius has been trying to influence his home state, the state of Lu. And he's been sought out as a wise person, as somebody who can offer advice, but he's never been given a job. And so he gets frustrated. Age about 50, he goes on the road. And he travels around proto-China trying to sell his ideas to a world that has recognized that empire is going to be zero-sum. That you're approaching the Warring States period. This culture called China emerges out of some of the most severe labor that the world has known. And Confucius goes on the road to try to persuade rulers that his way of thinking about social order, political order, is the most efficacious way. And so his reputation has preceded him. And so he goes to the Wuhan, Hubei area, and the governor of She, a prefecture in this area, in conversation with Confucius says, in our village there was true goody-goody. When his father took a sheep on the sly, when his father stole a sheep, he reported him to the authorities. Confucius replied, whoa, those who are true in my village conduct themselves differently. A father will cover for his son, and a son will cover for his father, and being true lies in doing just this. And so you can see how this plays into contemporary China. What you have is you have the problem of fubai. You have the problem of corruption. And so here you've got the rule of law, justice. I mean, a thief is a thief. And then you've got the idea that family relations, intimate relations, have to take precedence over law. And you can see how in the Chinese world this would become a point of contention. Is Confucius responsible for generating a set of values that has led to rampant corruption, or is Confucius responsible for establishing a tradition that is described by Fei Xiaotong, the great sociologist? He talks about Chinese empire as being 30% empire and 70% jiazu, shizu. That 70% of the glue that has kept this Chinese world together for 2,000 years has been family relationships. So is Confucius responsible for the strength of the Chinese tradition, family, the governing metaphor of the tradition, family, or is he responsible for intimate relationships that have redounded to rampant corruption? So what is Confucius's position? Is it the obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting criminals? Or in fact, is he doing what each one of us would actually do in this same kind of context? That is, doing what is optimally appropriate, doing what is E. Example. Some years ago, my older boy was about 14 years old. One day, I see him doing his homework, and he's got a really nice pen. And hey, I'm a professor. We love pens. And so I say, hey, Jay, where'd you get that pen? He says, oh, Drew gave it to me, my friend Drew. I said, oh, that's really nice. I'd like a pen like that. Ask Drew where he got it. He said, oh, Drew's up North Shore camping. And so I said, well, give Drew's dad a call and ask him, because I'd sure like to get one of those pens. Oh, Drew's dad's up there camping with him, you know. So it goes on a little bit. You got the story, you know. Jason took the pen from the store without paying for it. What do you do? What do you do? Get a stick? Do you sit him down and say, you're a good boy, but you've done a bad thing? Do you go to the store and pay for it? What do you do? Do you call 911 or whatever and the newspapers too? You know, we have a ne'er-do-well in our community. Let's get a picture of him, get it on the front page, and let's get this kid off to jail, you know. What would we do? I mean, what I did was I said, let's go. And so we went to the store. He says to the officer at the front of the store, I'd like to see the manager. He goes and says to the manager, I did something really wrong. I took your pen. And the manager took the strips off of him. You know, we are just a medium level community, and you're causing the whole community to pay more for everything. You know, you should be ashamed of yourself, and look at your father. You know, he's just absolutely embarrassed beyond belief. He said, now here's the story. I should call the police, get you out of here. But what I'm saying to you is, every day you walk by my store, and every day you think about what you did, you don't step a foot in the store for a year. If you do, I'll phone the police. And you think about what you've done. Have moral imagination. You know, that simply invoking the law, simply invoking principle is not good enough. That's not good enough in order to resolve our problems. That simply the application of abstract principles to abstract individuals doesn't get you justice. You know, sometimes it gets you something that might look like justice, but there's just too much complexity for this to be the most effective way of dealing with unfortunate circumstances. And so what you have here is you have this contest between Themis, or Justitia, a very foxy-looking justice, where she's got the sword, you know, to enforce justice. She's got the rational, the scales, to weigh it up, but she has the blindfold. That justice, and if you, I don't know in Australia if you followed the Sotomayor, the new Supreme Court Justice in the United States, and how she had to retract. I mean, she was a woman who grew up in the projects. She was a woman who would go to universities and talk out of her own experience about how, you know, living with a single parent and struggling made her a stronger person, and she would have a different attitude, a different perspective on what constitutes justice. When she was being questioned by the Senate, she had to retract all of that. You know, you enforce the law, my background makes no difference whatsoever. The law is the law, I have to enforce the law. You know, so the idea of blind justice is not a myth. And so Confucius chooses instead to advocate for family relations, but what we have to do is we have to contextualize Confucius's position. That in this tradition, the notion of shell, the notion of family reverence, is not simply doing as your family tells you, as your parents tell you, that where your parents are going astray, where you believe that there's something wrong, you don't have the option, you have the obligation to remonstrate with them. You have to find a tactful way of trying to correct the behavior of the older generation. And so this works in both directions. The ultimate goal is E, what is optimally appropriate in the circumstances. That's the goal for this Confucian tradition. And so we have this passage in the classic of family reverence, where Confucius has been talking to Zhengzi. Zhengzi in the tradition is this icon of family reverence. He's the person who is celebrated as being the person who does it best. And so Confucius has been talking to him for 14 chapters, and he says, Zhengzi says, oh, I get it. Respecting the family means doing as your parents tell you. And Confucius just is angry and says, you haven't heard a word I've said. That you have the obligation to remonstrate with the parents, that sometimes doing what your parents want you to do, far from being what you should do, is the opposite. Okay, so this notion and so what would that mean? That would mean that the son would have the obligation of making it right. If his father had stolen the sheep, then somehow or other that situation would have to be restored to what is optimally appropriate. Recompense, he would have to do something in order to make the situation right. So what you have in this tradition is you have that concept of justice, of blind justice, Themis, coming off the throne of Zeus, with a theistic understanding of doing justice, doing what is right, contrasted with an atheistic religiousness. In the Chinese tradition, there's not this concept of a transcendent God. That the term religion in Latin, religare, means to bind tightly. One way of binding tightly is to bind tightly with a transcendent God. Another way of binding tightly is to bind tightly with family and community. And so you have a human-centered religiousness as opposed to a God-centered religiousness, an importantly different way of being religious. And so then you have a contrast between faith in God and his justice versus faith in the trust that holds family and community together. And so Confucius is going with that. He's saying you're not going to get a strong state without a strong family. That family is the bottom line. Now, Bernard Williams, in his book Moral Luck, talks about a situation where a man is confronted with a disaster. And there are 3 people who are going to drown, and he can only save one of them. And so he chooses to save his wife. Bernard Williams says that to ask the man to give you a theoretical explanation for why he saved his wife is one thought too many, especially from the wife's point of view. That saving the wife is a reflexive action, that saving the wife doesn't require a kind of theoretical defense. And so what you've got is you've got this idea of reflexive conduct that where in role ethics, by cultivating yourself in your roles and relationships, what you're doing is you're cultivating a kind of moral response that is reflexive as opposed to reflective. You're not talking about moral obligation. You're not making choices, in the big moment choices. That what you're doing is you're being a wife, or you're being a mother, or you're being a grandparent. And you're doing what naturally, what is customary, what is normal. Normative. You're doing what is normal. And what is normal is what is optimally appropriate. And so what you have in this, what I want to suggest, and we're going to have a chance to talk about this, I hope, and that is that this Confucian way of thinking, its strength, I think, is its capaciousness. It's not talking about abstract principles and abstract people, people where justice is to be determined without consideration of your gender, of your age, of your ethnicity, and so on. This kind of the only way that you can pursue justice is by abstracting people and making them into the same thing. So the application of abstract principle to abstract human beings, that what this Confucian tradition wants to say is that is not sufficiently capacious, that we have to take into consideration the context, and we have to work very hard with imagination to find justice within particular contexts. So what you have is the difference between a kind of reductive idealism versus a holistic aestheticism, where you're saying that all of the conditions are necessary to explain and to deal with the totality of the effect. The other day I joked with the group about how this kind of idealism has become a common sense for us. If you ask somebody the question, what does an acorn become? They would say an oak tree. If you ask them what would a chicken egg become, they say a chicken. But the fact of the matter is that 1 in a million acorns become oak trees, the rest become squirrels. That 1 in a million chicken eggs becomes a chicken, most of them become breakfast, you know. And so this kind of idealistic way of thinking is really seeing the world in a way that is not sufficiently capacious, that isn't taking into account the reality of the human experience. One of the most extraordinary philosophers of the 20th century, we just put a bronze statue of Tang Junyi up at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. This is what he says about human nature. What is human nature if we're human becomings? I'm going to kill myself with this microphone. He says, within Chinese natural cosmology, that what is held in general is not some first principle. The root pattern or coherence of anything is its life force. And this life force is its natural tendencies. Anything's natural tendencies are expressed in the quality of its interactions with other things and events. Natural tendencies, or life force, then entailing spontaneity and transformation, have nothing to do with necessity. The emergence of any particular phenomenon, a human being, is a function of the interaction between its prior conditions and other things and events as external influences. So how something interacts with other things and events and the form of this interaction is not determined by the thing in itself. Thus, the basic nature of anything includes this transformability in response to whatever it encounters. What he's saying, real simple, and that is that association is a fact. We don't live our lives within our skins. We live our lives, we can't live physically without the collaboration between our lungs and the air that we breathe, between our eyes and the sun. We can't live our lives without the interaction with other people. We learn to love by being loved. If a child is not loved in the first hours, the first days, the first weeks of a child's life, they're put socially at risk. That we learn to love by being loved. That being a human being is transactional. The potential of a human being is not something that resides in itself. It's something that emerges over the narrative of a person's life, depending upon the people that this person can share their lives with. And so that things are defined through interactions. They're not defined by some kind of essential nature. This is what Tang Junyi is saying. So the text that we looked at today, Peter Wong, was the Great Learning. And what it says in this is the first of the 4 books. The 4 books were selected out of the tradition in the Song Dynasty, And they became sort of the Bible of the Chinese tradition. They became a shared vocabulary, a shared set of metaphors, a shared language, a shared set of anecdotes that people would use to communicate with each other. And the person who selected these 4 books, Zhu Xi, took this book as being the ground of the Confucian project. And what it says is, it says, 修身齐家治国平天下. You know, that what you do is you cultivate yourself. By cultivating yourself, you bring order to the family. By bringing order to the family, you bring order to the country. And in bringing order to the country, you bring order to the cosmos. And if you have an orderly cosmos, then you can bring order to the country, and then you can bring order to the family, and then you can cultivate yourself. So it goes in, it's radial, it goes in both directions. The starting point is personal cultivation, that each one of us must cultivate ourselves in our roles and relationships. This idea of role ethics is very simple. We live our lives in our associations, a fact. We don't do anything by ourselves, a fact. Then roles, being a grandmother, being a daughter, being a student, being a teacher, that these are simply stipulated associations. What association are you talking about? My association as a teacher. What association are you talking about? My association as a husband. You know, these roles simply stipulate associations, and then they become normative. Are you a good teacher? Are you a good husband? And so in this tradition, morality is the cultivation of yourself in your roles and relationships such that these roles and relationships become robust. That you become distinctive as an individual, distinguished as an individual, not independent of your relationships, but because of the quality of your relationships. If you're a good member of the community, if you have a strong family, then you emerge as a person that other people will defer to and say, this is a good person. Having a relationship with this person is a meaningful relationship. And so it's a relationally, the concept is that we as human beings do not play our roles and relationships. We're constituted by our roles and relationships. We're an onion. If you take away the roles and relationships, there's nothing left. That we are our roles and relationships. We live these roles and relationships. And so the Daxue, the Great Learning, it says, from the emperor down to the common folk, everything is rooted in personal cultivation. There can be no healthy canopy when the roots are not properly set, and it would never do for priorities to be reversed between what should be invested with importance and what should be treated more lightly. This commitment to personal cultivation is called both the root and the height of wisdom, the original Li Ji version of this text. And so where does this begin? Where does this process begin? In the Analects of Confucius, exemplary persons concentrate their efforts on the root. For the root having taken hold, one's vision of the moral life will grow therefrom. As for family reverence and fraternal deference, these are, I suspect, the root of becoming consummate in one's conduct. What it's saying is that we become consummate as human beings beginning in our family relationships. That the association of human beings begin with the roles and relationships that constitute family, and then we extend ourselves from those family relationships. Under these conditions, the role of friendship becomes hugely important. There's a passage in the Analects that says, with your family, always be congenial, always be agreeable. When it comes to friends, be demanding and critical. That you don't choose your family, but you do choose your friends, and your friends are your opportunity to grow yourself as a human being. You choose the right friends, you grow bigger as a human being. You choose the wrong friends, and you're diminished in your friendships. Okay? So, as I've said, autonomy is a fiction, association is a fact. Family roles and relations are usually our earliest locus of association. And here's a big word, paronomastic. Paronomastic definition simply means, it's like punning. It's definition by association. If we read Aristotle, Aristotle says, know something by its name. You know, genus and species, essence and attributes. If you can find out what something essentially is, then you know it. You find out its name. In this tradition, you've got to know something by another name. What is this gentleman as a brother? What is he like as a son? What is he like as a student? What is he like as a member of the community? That what you want to do, what you do is you map a person in terms of their roles and relationships. From this Confucian perspective, the idea of an individual is to essentialize something that is fundamentally relational. There's a joke. John Dewey told a joke. John Dewey was born before Abraham Lincoln became president of the United States, and he died when Eisenhower. He lived to be 92 years old. And one day he and George Herbert Mead, this social psychologist, went to a lecture. And George said to John, he said, look at these two women on the road there. And so John looks at these two women, he says, yeah, what about them? He says, don't they look alike? He says, yes. He says, they do look alike. He said, especially the woman on the left. Well, that's what we're doing when we essentialize people. We're taking things that are fundamentally essential or fundamentally relational, and we're making them essential. It's like saying she's good. Well, what you're really saying is she's good with, she's good to, she's good at, she's good for, and then you say she is good. But good is not something that resides within her. Good is a description of the way in which she performs her roles and relationships. And so the whole, the concept of person is fundamentally relational. Roles simply stipulate specific forms of social association, and ethical conduct is very simple. It's an achieved virtuosity that transforms mere social association into flourishing family and thriving community. That morality is taking our associations, where we all live in our relationships. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to live them well? The greatest, we were talking about this today in one of the sessions, that the greatest inadequacy perhaps of the human being is taking each other for granted, for not paying attention in our roles and relationships, for not making an effort that is same old, you know, that, and you don't stop and you don't appreciate the people that constitute your world. The Confucian tradition is to take the most ordinary thing, a grandmother's love for her grandson, ordinary, but also the most extraordinary thing in the world, to take the ordinary and to make it extraordinary. That's this idea of role ethics in the Confucian tradition. And we translate it as, for those who read Chinese, 儒学角色伦理学, but you don't really need to have the roles, because the very way in which ethics is represented in the Chinese, the Japanese tradition relies upon the concept of role, ren lun, that you're talking about roles, and you're not simply talking descriptively, you're talking prescriptively when you're talking about roles and relationships. So morality is this one thread, is putting oneself in another's place, and we're on the basis of a cultivated imagination, trying to figure out, how can I take this actuality, this relationship with Karsten, how can I see the possibilities that honeycomb it, how can I select out the best way of responding to him, and how can I then be conscientious enough to realize that in our relationship. And so the idea is deference, is deferring to the other people, looking at a situation from their point of view, and then trying to act in such a way that you grow the relationships. And so what you have is you have this kind of a contrast between an autonomous soul and virtuosic relationality, where the term that I'm using for consummate person is Ren, and it's constituted by the character for person and the number 2. That the way that you move from being just a person to being a consummate person has to do with what you do with the 2s, what you do with the relationships. And we use that in English too. I mean, you would say there are footballers and there are footballers, meaning that some of them are magnificent and some of them are quite ordinary. You know, we use the same sound. Ren is person, 我是美国人, I'm an American, and Ren 义的人, I'm a consummate person. I guess you better not say that. But what is really interesting about this notion of Ren is there's the ambiguity between agent and conduct, between self and other, between singular and plural, and between unique and what is held in common. That these are not clearly distinguished in this character. So what does that mean? That means that we can't say that there's a difference between consummate conduct and consummate person. That a person is simply a narrative. They are a story. They're an unfolding narrative of conduct. That self and other, the only way that I can be a good teacher is by having magnificent students. And the more magnificent the students, the more magnificent the teacher. That you would win together or you don't win at all. You can't be a real good mother and have rotten kids. You might be a nice person, you know, but you're not a great mother. You know, it has to come together or it doesn't come at all. And so the idea of self-other, relations are not means and ends. You know, you Ren in order to be Ren. You're consummate in order to be a consummate person. It's not some kind of a means to an end. And so the unique and common, Tang Juni again, he says, 一朵不分管, you know, the inseparability of one and many, that you have a unique person, but a person who's defined by a multiplicity of roles and relationships. And so you don't have one behind the many, some kind of an ideal, a concept of God, a concept of the ideal human being. What you have is you have people who are uniquely who they are, and at the same time having a multiplicity of relationships that constitute them as this unique person. One of the things that people are concerned about when you talk about being constituted by your roles and relationships is it seems as though you're losing yourself. I don't want to be an onion, you know, that an onion doesn't have anything inside it. But when you think about this particular model of being human, you're a matrix of relationships, a manifold of relationships that are all uniquely you. That you're unsubstitutable. There's no self-same identical characteristic that makes us all essentially the same. That we're all unique individuals constituted by this particular manifold of roles and relationships. And so the idea, the quality of uniqueness that you get in the Confucian tradition is a stronger idea than in a tradition that begins with, we are all human beings because we have the self-same identical soul that qualifies us as human beings. And so you have not, I mean, the concept of relationality is not two things that have integrity and they come into some kind of relationship, but when we make friends, we literally make friends. That we are in the business of creating each other as human beings. And when you lose somebody who is really significant, it is surgical. A piece of you is torn away in that process. And so there's a passage, like the one term that Confucius really develops is this notion of Ren, the idea of becoming consummate in one's roles and relationships. This is Confucius's own idea. And so one day, his students are always asking him, excuse me, what does ren mean? And so one day, Confucius sort of gives them an oral exam. And so he says to the first one, 自路, what do I mean when I say ren? And 自路says, 使人爱己, cause people to have self-esteem, to love themselves. And Confucius says, this is a very good answer. He's 自贡, what do I mean when I say ren? 自贡 says, 爱人, love other people. And Confucius says, that's even better. You have to love other people. He says, 颜惠, what do I mean when I say ren? And 颜惠 says, 自爱, love yourself. And Confucius says this is the best answer. That loving yourself is not loving yourself independent of other people. It's loving yourself as a teacher. It's loving yourself as a neighbor. It's loving yourself as a spouse, as a member of a family. That loving yourself has to do with loving those relationships that constitute you as a self. And hence, Confucius gives this the endorsement. Now, we were talking, James, I thought we saw Hilary Putnam come in. It wasn't. But Putnam says this, that's really very interesting. He says, elements of what we call language or mind penetrate so deeply into what we call reality that the very project of representing ourselves as being mappers of some language-independent world is fatally compromised from the start. You know, what he's saying is that our reality is our experience. And this experience is not a mind-independent world and some kind of a human mind, that it's a collaboration between the mind and the world. And so he's using the language of 20th century philosophy, talking about language and mind. What the Confucian tradition talks about is it talks about body and achieved relationships. And so what Confucius is saying is that we achieve our identity by embodying a world. Well, what does it mean to embody a world? The word for body in the classical tradition has three different ways of being represented. One of them is with the skeleton, one of them is with the lived body, and one of them is with the carnal body, with meat. And so what does it mean to embody a world with this idea of the skeleton? What we do is, because we're embodied, we theorize a world a certain way, we conceptualize a world a certain way, we understand the world a certain way. That what we do is we make the world our own through embodying the world. The second one, the notion of shen, the idea of a lived body, we grow as human beings, and growing as human beings, we come to existentially understand what it means to become a human being, and then we find a vocabulary to express it. That understanding what it means to be human is not simply studying something, it's living something and then trying to figure it out. And then the third one is the carnal body, is the flesh and blood body. And so it's not language and mind that penetrate into the world, it's the body and our roles and relationships, our associations that penetrate into the world, and it's on that basis that we become who we are. And so this classic of family reverence, it says, your physical person with its hair and skin is received from your parents. Vigilance is not allowing anything to do injury to your person, is where family reverence begins. That in this Chinese tradition, the beginning of respecting your family is to return your body to the ancestors intact. And so in the tradition, if somebody did something wrong, ambulatory punishments, taking off a nose, taking off an ear, taking off a hand, branding, That what you would do is not only would you show the community that this was a bad person, but this person would have to take this back to the ancestors and would be humiliated by this kind of a punishment. And so the idea of taking your body back certainly has this physical meaning, but it also has the meaning of inheriting the culture, making the culture your own, and then passing it on unbroken to the generations that come after. That this whole notion of shell has to do with the transmission of culture from one generation to the next. That when we look at ourselves in the mirror, and you look at the picture of grandma, on the wall, dressed in different clothes that belong to 75 years ago, you still see the same physicality. You still identify the same bloodline. But it's also the values of the family. It's also the orientation, the way of being in the world of the family, the language, the accent, the food, the dance, the songs, the religious feelings, and so on. That each generation embodies the generation that came before, and has the obligation not only of keeping this body intact, but keeping the body of the culture intact. Okay? So this idea of embodiment is really important. You have an expression to 体会. You understand something thoroughly by embodying it. Well, what I wanted to do was to create a new term, and that is 理会. That is to say that we also know our world through the 理, through our roles and relationships that constitute us as human beings. Now, let me finish up here and just try to make some points about this idea of Confucian role ethics. First, the importance of friendship. That family is the starting place, is the entry point for developing moral competence. But when we learn to defer to other members of our family, we can then take it outside and participate more fully in the world. And so friendship becomes friendship becomes the doorway through which people come into the family from outside. So that your very best friends, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but when I bring Karsten home, my son would call him Uncle Karsten. That uncles and aunties, you have a whole community of uncles and aunties, because that's the way that people come in, friends come in through the door. That this is a shame culture, where shame has everything to do with a concern about how you are perceived in terms of your roles and relationships with other people. That it has a kind of universal aspect, in the sense that it's not elitist, that everyone has a family, and family becomes the beginning of achieving moral competence. Again, what I said a moment ago, and that is that a person can only learn to love by being loved, and so family nurturance is not optional. That we need to have family nurturance, and if you don't get it in the immediate family, then you need surrogates. You need to find it somewhere. Probably the most compelling, the most powerful argument for role ethics is very simple, and that is that if your neighbor does better, you do better. If your daughter does better, you do better. That either we do better together, or we don't do better at all. If your neighbor is without, then somehow or other, that is reflective. That comes back on you. And then finally, in this tradition, just as we need a different vocabulary for ethics, vocabulary that belongs to this tradition itself, as opposed to one more time using Western categories to frame the Chinese experience, that if we need a different vocabulary to talk about ethics in the Confucian tradition, we also need a different vocabulary to talk about religion. You have this human-centered religiousness, where religion is not the source, is not the ground, but rather the flower of achieving effective family and community. That spirituality, religiousness, is something that we achieve in our roles and relationships. It is something that is available to us because of the contribution that we make to family and community, and to the sense of worth that we have. This is my family. You know, I'm the parent in this family. This family, I belong here. This is my family. That sense of felt worth is the ground of this human-centered religiousness within the Confucian tradition. Thank you very much.